Hello everyone, welcome to this edition of Defacto Review. Today here with us the guest commentator Mugi and myself Bilgun. Let's take a look at today's headlines. The spring plenary session of Parliament convened. Member of Parliament GANTULGA expected to be suspended from Parliament. The Independent Authority Against Corruption has arrested 3 suspects in the course of its investigation of the ULAANBAATAR investment agreement. Western 5 Amex will be connected to ULAANBAATAR city with paved roads. Okay, first we're gonna start discussing about the plenary session that was commenced last week. So the spring plenary session was convened with the remarks delivered by the Prime Minister and as well as Mr. President. So the session was attended by 80% attendance of total members, discussing several issues such as the ULAANBAATAR agreement. So what do you think? What's your view on the session, the opening the session, especially the speeches delivered by the MPs and President?
There are a couple of things that caught my attention, especially from the President. But the Speaker also mentioned about moving forward some of the mega projects, which I think all the investors would appreciate, including the oil refinery, as so that would be a welcome news for investors. There are several things in the President's speech that caught my attention. He mentioned that he will introduce a bill to remove the chairman of the Independent Authority Against Corruption, citing that the agency is not doing adequately to fight corruption, and that it's actually not doing its job very well. So he said he will introduce a bill soon to the Parliament. Right. So it is between the President's purview to nominate the head of the agency, but the appointing body is the Parliament plenary session. So even if he wishes to change the head of the agency, if the Parliament doesn't accept it, he won't have his wishes fulfilled. So he cited that the corruption index by the Transparency International during the last 2 years when the current head was appointed, the index went down 34 spots, and citing as one of the reasons why he wants to change the head of the agency.
Right.
So he said that they will introduce a bill very soon, 2 bills. First one, namely, is the child allowances that he said he wants to give all the children in Mongolia a monthly allowance of 20,000 from the current 80%. So it was 60% until recently, but the government last week during its cabinet meeting decided to extend it to 80% of the children, but the President wants it to extend it to 100. All the economists and analysts say that any kind of universal cash handouts, universal welfare is not good. So if you are covering in the most needy 60%, even now it's 80%, why do we need to cover the rest of the 20%, which is the wealthiest children from the most wealthiest families? And do they actually need that 20%, 28,000 a month? So this is a very, I would say this is a very populist move. 80% and 100%, which is 100% is much more detrimental to the budget, but the 100%, that image of that tagline of 100%. Is going to be very popular, and that's why he wants to, I think, give all the children in Mongolia.
So do they have the exact numbers, like who falls into that 20% and who falls into that 80%?
So this would be, until last week, it was 60%, and 60% is the lowest income, children from the lowest incomes. So the leftover 20% would be the most wealthiest people.
Right.
So as I mentioned, and do they actually need that money? I would say they don't, and probably they won't even check their bank account if they got that money.
But maybe just in order to be fair to everybody, they need to
Right.
provide the amount to everybody, right?
Well, actually, I would say that giving all the children money would not be fair to the lowest income families because this is this will put a very big strain on the budget, and the budget will not be able to also meet other needs of the 80% or the 60%. So, if you're talking about fairness, I would say actually not fair giving every child a monthly allowance.
Okay.
So the second bill he wants to reintroduce the death penalty, but specifically only for cases involving child rape, underage child rape. And when he was talking about his intention to introduce that bill, he said that since the European Union does not appoint Mongolia's government, Mongolian government should be able to do what's right, meaning that he's citing European Union because European Union is, I think, as part of their European Constitution does not allow the death penalty anymore. So, citing that European Union would not like Mongolia reintroducing the death penalty again. So I think that's a very naive statement to be made by the president, who, by the Constitution, has the role of representing Mongolia in international affairs. So I don't think the newly opened European Union delegation office here did not take that comment very welcome. Yeah. So these are two bills that he said he will gather public opinion on. There's a law called Law About Laws, meaning that every bill that's going to be introduced to Parliament needs to be publicly discussed first, and the bill actually needs to be accompanied by the comments of the public in order for the Parliament to be accepted. And this is a very newly passed law. I think it was passed only 2-3 years ago. So he's now opening opening to the public these bills. He said we'll put it on his website and take public opinion comments on it.
In terms of the laws on mega projects to move it forward, what has it been? What has been discussed?
So I think the speaker, when he says mega projects, he's not only, of course, talking about the oil refinery. He's talking about the railway, the power stations that needs to be built. Oyu-Tolgoi needs to be able to supply energy to the project itself. So, and for me, I think most importantly for investors, the most important mega projects that need to move forward is the railway. So, hopefully, during this session, they would do something about the railway. The Prime Minister is now in China, and the expectation that obviously what will be discussed is the Tolgoi project again, and always the railway will always accompany that project. So hopefully, Prime Minister will come something with something concrete from the Chinese side on the railway issue.
Right. What's your view on the member of parliaments who also have table in the government? So do you think the parliament is asking for justice, or the responsibilities from the government?
Sure. One of the criticism of this cabinet is that only one member of the cabinet is not a member of parliament, which is the prime minister himself. Everybody else on this cabinet has a double del, which is something called when we are both member of parliament and cabinet members. So obviously, the parliament will have a tough time having a oversight over the cabinet. So, but there's also issue of the majority being also divided as well. So I'm not sure if that also will probably play into how Parliament will be able to oversee cabinet.
All right. So thank you for talking about the plenary session. So let's move towards our second topic, which is about the member of Parliament Gantulga to be suspended from Parliament. So according to the source, he requested the Parliament to suspend to be suspended. So how, what's your view on that? And if it's, why is he not suspended yet? Is there, the law to work
Right.
in that? Mm-hmm.
So this is also a first precedent in a way, because until last December, a member of parliament could not have been stripped of its rights unless that member of parliament gets caught in the act of a crime with all the evidences.
Right.
Meaning that there was no way a member of parliament would ever be suspended of its rights at all, or and be investigated or sentenced or or tried. So the Constitutional Court last December made a ruling saying that specific clause in the law about the parliament that protects it from any kind of legal action stripped it and said it was unconstitutional. And any kind of constitutional court decision that's made by its upper hearing is final and becomes law from the moment it gets passed in Constitution. So, and this is the first, and that's why the prosecutor's office has been able to ask the parliament to strip him of his rights so that they could continue with the investigation and perhaps even try him in court. But this is, as I said, this is the first time it has happened since that clause was entered in 2002. Never has a member of parliament been ever stripped of its rights in Mongolia's modern history. So this would create an important precedent for any kind of future members of parliament or any kind of future cases against members of parliament.
How about voluntarily? Like we've seen member of parliaments.
Even voluntarily, even a member of parliament cannot voluntarily, resign from parliament. So it has to be approved by parliament. Even if you want to be retire from politics, or so this case happened during the last parliament, where MP Amar Jargal from DP wanted to resign. He even gave his resignation request, but the parliament did not accept his resignation. So he continued until 2016 to be a member of parliament. Sometimes the current prime minister during the last parliament also resigned, but since he cited his wife's health issues, the parliament accepted it. So even if you want to, parliament doesn't have to accept it. So in this case, a subcommittee on ethics was convened last Friday. There's a deadline of 48 hours where parliament has to decide whether they make a decision, and that time limit expired on last Friday. So there's a possibility or a situation where parliament might be breaking the law.
Right.
And so this is creating as a member of parliament mentioned, that there's a kind of legal limbo. The parliament's in legal limbo because this is the first time that it's happening, and they might have broken the law by not making a decision by the deadline. So we're in a weird situation right now.
Right. So what's the parliament majority's view on that?
So I think the majority is also, divided. As our viewers will remember, the current prime minister made a sort of a internal revolution with this party and to become a prime minister, right? So the majority is evenly sort of divided. They have 65 seats in parliament out of the 76 supermajority, but that faction majority is sort of evenly split between 33 and 32 members of parliament. So the current prime minister has an edge over the other faction, where it has one more seat, and that's why he was able to become prime minister on top of the previous government. So, and I think the majority also is not settled on the issue, judging from the way they couldn't decide on the deadline. So there's also kind of rumors going on around where the prime minister maybe wants to take his seat because, as I mentioned before, he's the only cabinet member who's not a member of parliament. So if Gantulga is removed from parliament, the current prime minister might run for his seat in a by-election. But the problem is also that Gantulga is from the prime minister's faction. So he's within his, so there's a decision that needs to be made whether to accept it or not. He actually himself when he found out that the prosecutor was going to make that request, he himself personally made the request to be stripped of its legal protection, so that he wants to defend his honor or something. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the arrest of a 3-person last week. So the Bayer Sachang, Arian Sang, and also Bim Sachang, they have been suspected of breaking the law during the establishment of the allowance agreement. So what's your view on that?
Well, this is also a very touchy subject, and I think more so for investors. Foreign investors obviously see the OT agreement as the cornerstone, as the base for any kind of future investment decisions. So if the government tries to do something wrong or controversial regarding OT, this would be a sign that foreign investors will not be able to, or decide not to invest in Mongolia. So this is very important. I can appreciate that the OT agreement is not a perfect agreement. There might have been a little bit of corruption during the signing, but this is all not proven stuff, right? So, and that's not the problem. The problem is the government trying to always make trouble for OT, or some politicians making grievous accusations saying that this is the OT agreement must be canceled and everything. And this creates an uncertainty. And uncertainty is the #1 deterrent for foreign investment, political risk, right? So any kind of perception of increased political risk, that stems from any kind of involvement or meddling in the OT agreement, it will be seen by foreign investors as something, as a sign of not to invest Mongolia. So this, I know that it's if there was corruption, if there is evidence of corruption, yes, I agree that the anti-corruption agency must investigate it. But looking at the 3 people who were arrested and detained, they're all from the Democratic Party,
right?
And especially within a certain faction of the Democratic Party. And as soon as the Reuters article came out about Beitzocht being perhaps received money through his Swiss bank account, the next day the chairman of the Democratic Party had a press conference announcing that he was expelling Beitzocht from his Democratic Party. So, so you can see that from both within MPP within itself has its own internal problems, while DP has historically had internal battles from the very beginning. So, so the DP chairman actually expelling someone for something that has not been proven in court means that it's very political. Perhaps the current rulers of the Democratic Party is trying to clean its party itself from certain faction that was involved in the OT agreement.
It's almost a trend that most state workers are going through the anti-corruption agency. Is it because there is a lot of corruption in there, or is it a lot of politics behind it?
Well, obviously, corruption is a major problem in Mongolia, and it's probably what's keeping Mongolia from reaching its promise of becoming a wealthy country from its natural resources. And it's also, a lot of state workers, public servants get involved in corruption cases. But one of the criticisms that I mentioned before was that none of the big cases gets ever solved. Perhaps only the biggest guy was the former president, Iqbal. Ever since that, no big corruption cases were ever solved, or no big government official was ever arrested or detained. And the president's speech also mentioned about how the anti-corruption agency is not doing its job at all, that it's toothless. But also on the side of the agency is very understaffed, and they have to investigate. They cover any kind of corruption, even in a remote little school or somewhere in the outskirts of far reaches of the country. So they're very heavily understaffed. But that means they have to pick their battles to choose, and I think they should always go after the big cases, where the big cases is what, if they get solved, that's what's going to deter future corruption.
in public's eye, like what's the anti-corruption agency is doing is, kind of a relief for public that they go after the politics and find out if they found guilty. But on the other hand, for like young state workers, isn't that kind of disappointing for them?
Of course, of course. If someone, I would say that every Mongolian loves their country, right? But but there needs to be that extra level of love for your country to be served for your country, right? Working as a very low-paying public official, trying to do something good. And we've seen several cases of promising young, their hearts in the right place, get involved in corruption cases and get, and their reputation is ruined. So obviously, this is, public service itself is not a very attractive place for, I would say, ethical or corrupt, right people, and public service becomes a place where only the corrupt go to, right? So this is obviously deterrent for any kind of young professional who wants to serve their country.
Right. All right, let's move over to the next topic about the infrastructure. We have good news that our western 5 provinces will be connected to the capital city by 556 kilometers of paved roads. How is this project being funded?
So privately, publicly, and with foreign soft loans. Obviously, any kind of publicly funded road projects, the criticism is that the quality of the roads are not great. But that's just because the level of corruption, the cost of corruption they have to pay to get that tender is very high. And there's obviously a certain standard that needs to be followed in building a road. I would say that it's not very different or far from any kind of international standards. So publicly, the document, the cost of the project is always up according to international standards. But what happens is the level of money they have to pay to get that tender is very high, so they have to cut from the quality of the roads. And as any kind of road gets, I think everyone in Mongolia knows that Mongolian roads don't last a year, and after a year it needs to be upgraded and fixed again. So that's of course, obviously the persistent issue with. Another issue is that I like to touch upon is some critics say that building a paved road to all IMEX is not the right decision, or it's too expensive, or it won't bring any kind of development to those IMEX. But I would actually disagree with that. Road access and transportation access is important to any country or IMEC or province for its development. And as our viewers will remember, in the last couple of years, since we built the paved road to Hufskul IMEC, to Hufskul Lake, there has been a lot of flood of domestic tourists to flooding the lake and creating a traffic problem, creating a gas shortage, creating a shortage of even food and supplies over there. So
that never existed like a few years ago.
Right, because we didn't have a paved road. Anyway, it took much longer a day to get to Hufskul. Now it just takes 8 or 9 hours of driving. So, and that's why. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's good for that province. I think it creates more revenue for that province. And Hufskul is not a mining IMEC, so it really heavily depends on agriculture. And if you add extra layer of tourism revenue, I think that's good. It'll be good for the IMEC itself. One of the side effects of obviously increased domestic tourism is littering, right? Garbages that was spilled and thrown away in the lake. But the good news is, the good side of it is that people, society, and especially on social media, are have been campaigning against that. So I would say in a couple of years, I think Mongolian domestic tourists would be much more ethical tourists. So I think that
Besides tourism, do you think it's going to affect the decentralization? Like, you know, it's going to affect the movement out of the city?
Yes, obviously that will help the 5 most Western IMEX be more be able to conduct more trade with the city as well, and you know, any kind of free movement, I think, is good for that economy. And as I mentioned before, if every citizen UP doesn't go to Hu School anymore, they might decide to go to Western IMEX. So it'll, I think increase in domestic tourism, I think, is good for those IMEX especially.
Let me get a short answer for the question about the concession agreement. So many roads are built under this kind of agreement. Is it a right type of agreement for Mongolians? How is it doing in Mongolia?
Well, this is a problem of a country not being able to fund all of its, you know, infrastructure needs by its own budget. So concession is and any kind of public-private partnerships is probably the best way to go if you want to not waste time. So, but the issue is obviously, you know, the tender process and constant increase in the budget and the amount of time it takes to actually finish that concession, and the risk for that contractor is getting paid on time by the government. I think no road contractor was ever paid on time by the government, I think, especially when we had budget issues before. But great. But good news is obviously that this year budget revenue has been increasing, so perhaps maybe this year they might get their money on time.
All right, thank you for to cover all these topics, and unfortunately we're running out of time. So this was the edition of Defacto Review. So today's guest commentator was Mugi, and we'll see you next Sunday for another Defacto review session.
And if you have any, I'm sorry, if you have any comments, you can obviously comment on our Facebook Live that's going on right now. And if you have any also comments, please tweet them at #jargle_defacto. And thank you for watching Defacto Review, and good night.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.